Good afternoon, everyone. Very good to have you here. Our topic is, could Japan-China relations be worse? Unfortunately, of course, they could be. On the surface, they have been worse. When I first came to Beijing in 2012, there were demonstrations outside the Japanese embassy. There was vandalism against Japanese businesses, and there was a really dire anti-Japanese public mood, all sparked by the purchase of the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. We had near clashes in the East China Sea, and we had the establishment unilaterally of the ADIZ by China. Fast forward a bit, and we have Abe and Xi meeting, sort of meeting, in Beijing last November. It has to have been one of the shortest, most perfunctory diplomatic meetings anywhere. We all remember the reluctant handshake, Xi's glumness. Then last week we had the meeting in Jakarta, which was a little better, I guess. The Japanese writers, I understand, made a big thing out of how it was 5 minutes longer than the 30 minutes in November, but that still makes it pretty short. But I guess we should be happy that it happened. But under this slight thaw, things seem to be profoundly stuck. We are here while Prime Minister Abe is in Washington, and the morning after, the United States and Japan have signed new defense guidelines that allow Japan to act out of area. Japan can now intercept missiles flying towards the United States. Japan can defend US forces under attack. The guidelines say the US and Japan can cooperate closely on the maintenance of maritime order. The US says these guidelines are not aimed at China. Still, there has been very negative reaction in the Chinese press. This morning, Xinhua said, "The shrewd calculator, the United States, has brought its eggs to a bad market this time and will ultimately pay the piper for its blind trust towards a recidivist troublemaker." Quite strong words. This stronger Japan-US alliance is happening while Japan's economy still remains in the doldrums, a factor that makes Japan ever more nervous about China's much larger economy. I came across this extraordinary figure last night. It seems that 40% of workers in Japan have only part-time or contract work. Will TPP make a difference to that? China is facing tough economic times too. There are those who say Japan can manage an economic recovery, but even so, will that help the underlying tensions between China and Japan? And overlaying all of this are the history issues that are particularly tough in this 70th anniversary year of the end of World War II. To discuss some of these points and more, we have Chen Ping, the distinguished deputy editor of the Global Times English edition, a paper I read with great interest every morning.
Thank you.
Mr. Chen worked for a decade at the China Daily. He has a special interest in China's relations with South and North Korea and holds an MA from the Korea Development Institute. We have we have Bonnie Glaser. Sorry, the order's a little different to what I expected. Bonnie Glaser is Senior Advisor for Asia at CSIS in Washington, and the person in Washington who knows everything before everyone else on China and the region. She is unsurpassed in her knowledge on everything from the South China Sea to the nitty-gritty of how US policy towards China is crafted. We have Yoichi Kato, the national security correspondent of the Asahi Shimbun and a good friend from his recent stint in Beijing. You should look up his dynamite interview in the Shimbun today with David Shear, Assistant Secretary for Defense at the Pentagon. There are some very interesting things in that interview. And we have Kim Hong-chu, Director of the Ajao China Policy Institute here in Seoul. Mr. Kim has been a policy advisor on foreign affairs to the Korean government and was a participant in the South Korea-China strategic dialogues. He has spent a lot of time in China and understands the Chinese point of view as well as that of his own country. Over to you, Mr. Chen, for what I know will be some very forthright comments.
Yes, thank you. I would like to start by answering the questions about the title of this panel. Could it be worse? No. My answer is no. Because, first of all, we had two top-level meeting in 6 months. That's a sign of a soaring of tension between China and South Korea and Japan. Number two, there are still working level contacts between the two governments. Many channels for dialogues and consultations are still open. Number three, at a non-government level, the anti-Japan sentiment in China has reduced greatly. Let me give you an example. According to the latest diplomatic blue book for 2015 issued early this month by Japan, 2.4 million Chinese visited Japan in 2014. And there's a very special, very interesting phenomenon during the Spring Festival in February this year. A Japanese TV station reported that over 450,000 Chinese visited Japan during a 10-day period. And they spent roughly 6 billion yuan, roughly $1 billion US dollars, during the 10-day period. So a Hong Kong newspaper commented that to some extent, Chinese visitors were contributing to Japan's economy and to justify the Abenomics. Then I have another question here. Could the bilateral ties be improved greatly in the near future? My answer is not likely, and I have several reasons. Number one, there's no quick, no easy answers to the issues that have led to the Sino-Japanese diplomatic problems, mainly historical disputes and territorial disputes. When Mr. Abe spoke at the recent Jakarta summit, he expressed only Japan's deep remorse over its atrocities during World War II, without issuing a direct apology. This was a retreat from the Murayama statement in which former Japanese Prime Minister Murayama expressed his heartfelt apology for Japan's colonial rule and aggression in Asia. So this reminded me of a comment from the Chinese edition of the Global Times, which is more popular than the English edition within China. The title of this comment is, "If Mr. Abe doesn't respect history, how could he win the trust from the world community?" Also, in its 2015 diplomatic blue book, Japan made aggressive territorial claims over the disputed island in East China Sea. The claims, of course, were severely criticized by China and South Korea. Number two, that the China policy adopted by Abe administration has been regarded as confrontational. He himself is an enthusiastic advocate of the so-called China threat theory, and also he's the designer of the so-called Arc of Freedom and Democracy. Of course, we have international factors to consider when we talk about Sino-Japanese relations, mainly the US role in Sino-Japan relations. China is seriously concerned about the US-Japan alliance. Just yesterday, China's foreign ministry said, "It is our, quote, it is our constant stance that the US and Japan are responsible to ensure that their bilateral alliance does not jeopardize a third party's interest, including China's, nor undermine peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific." The new US-Japan joint defense guidelines are believed to target China, at least partly. So some would say that Japan is a proxy of the US in the Asia-Pacific region. I myself is a journalist, so that means I'm not an official, I'm not a scholar, So I would like to share my personal observation in this. That is, my personal observation is, under the new Chinese leadership, China has adopted a grand strategy, a grand diplomacy strategy, which focuses mainly on the new model of big country relations and the One Belt, One Road initiative. That means currently Japan's importance in China's new diplomatic thinking has reduced. Some Chinese scholars even said that Japan has been marginalized in China's foreign policy. But of course, this argument is open to debate. Right now, I think there are some issues that we should pay attention to in talking about Sino-Japanese relations. Number one is that Japan is trying to revise its pacifist constitution, mainly Clause 9. Number two, Japan is trying its hard efforts to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Of course, China has its concern about this. Number three, Japan's reaction to the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Also, Japan's attitude toward AIIB. China's Ministry of Finance confirmed that by April 15th, a total of 57 countries have been confirmed as the founding member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Unfortunately, Japan is not among them. So I think Japan might miss the opportunities that the AIIB would bring to its founding members. Well, how can China and Japan develop ways to manage their often volatile relations? Number one, Japan and China have convergence of common interest. We have to identify this common interest. The countries should take this into consideration in its policy making. Number two, the two countries should try to solve bilateral issues without external interference. Number three, during the latest Xi-Abe meeting, Xi stressed the need to strictly follow the spirit of the four political joint statements reached by the two countries. Of the four political documents, I think the 1972 joint communique deserves special attention because in this joint communique, Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation is mentioned. However, Japan's diplomatic blue book for 2015 defines what China called Diaoyu Island as its own territory. This claim is contradictory to both historical fact and the Article 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation. Because this year marks the end of the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, that is the anniversary of the world's anti-fascist war. So in this context, Japan should respect and follow Clause 6 of the Potsdam Proclamation and one important clause in its Instrument of Surrender, signed on September 2nd, 1945. Another point is that Japan should respond properly to China's re-emergence as a regional power and accept the reality that currently there are two regional powers in Northeast Asia. And last but not least, as the territorial dispute between the two countries couldn't be solved overnight, joint effort should be made for crisis management in East China Sea, including crisis avoidance and crisis control. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bonnie.
Well, the question that's posed here is whether or not China's relations with Japan could be worse, and I think I would state there are lots of ways they could be worse, and I agree with Jane. The atmosphere in 2012 following Japan's purchase of the 3 Senkaku Diaoyu Islands is far worse than it is today. Fortunately, we've avoided an accident in the air, for example, over the disputed islands. So I think we can dispense with that questions. I think the relationship is improving. And so I think we should look at this question perhaps of why the relationship is improving. Certainly there have been efforts by both sides, and Jane referred to the 4-point agreement, the meeting at APEC, which I think was primarily driven by the desire of the host, President Xi, to not offend his guests, and therefore he agreed to meet with Abe. Of course, the optics of that meeting were quite negative. Some people say that it looked like they had smelled each other's socks. You know, they had such a sour look on their face. But now, of course, we see that they met again in Jakarta. And so that's interesting because China wasn't the host. And there's actually a report that Kyoto has put out that says that that meeting took place at China's request. Now, I don't know if that is true, but it would fit with my analysis, so I'm going to go with it for the time being. Xi Jinping also was quoted by China's official news agency, Xinhua, as saying after their meeting in Jakarta that, or during the meeting, that China-Japan relations have improved somewhat. And so I think he was really trying to present this potential for a more positive trajectory and recognize, again, that both sides have made some effort. So we've seen the resumption of the defense security dialogue on crisis management mechanisms, parliamentary exchanges, foreign ministers meeting, and these 2 meetings between the 2 leaders. So I think both leaders are indeed trying to put the relationship on a positive path. I'd like to stir the pot a little bit by digging into this question of what the drivers are behind the shift in China's approach. I think that my colleague Yoichi Kato is going to talk a little bit about Japan's drivers, and I'm going to leave that aside. But I want to raise this question of whether or not China has realized that its approach to Japan has really not worked, and that in fact maybe it has been counterproductive. So I think we can just look at some evidence. Obviously, polls show there's a very high level of hostility among Japanese people towards China. There has been a reduction in new investment by Japan into China over the last couple of years, and I think that has been negative for China. And Japan has taken a series of steps to strengthen its security, some of which has been in response to developments in North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, absolutely, but also in response to developments in China's military. And just to cite a few, there's been an increase in defense spending, the passage of a law to protect state secrets, the strengthening of the defense of the Southwest Islands, the decision to sell defense equipment abroad. There was, of course, the constitutional interpretation that broadens the scope of self-defense, reconfiguration of the force posture and structure, and the defense guidelines with the United States. And this, of course, is not an exhaustive list. At the same time, we've seen Japanese diplomacy become much more active, including and especially in Southeast Asia and in the South China Sea. So the question is, if China, if these are in fact costs, what have been the benefits for China? And I think it was at this very forum last year where I was on a panel talking about these issues and addressed this issue of whether or not China has gained administrative control over these disputed islands. That has not been recognized, of course, by anyone. But I think that China believes that that is where the gain has been made, at least challenging Japan's exclusive administrative control. But even there has been a negative effect, and that is that President Obama has said several times that the Mutual Security Treaty covers those islands. So I think that the sustained pressure on Japan for the past 2.5 years has not achieved China's goal of persuading the Japanese to admit that a territorial dispute actually exists. And there has been quite a bit of downside. So I'm going to posit that China has recognized that the security competition needs to be controlled. The risks of accident are potentially very negative for both sides, because even if they don't escalate to a military crisis, the political fallout would be enormous. And is now beginning to change its policy. Now, of course, that said, the improvement has been fragile. I think China is worried that Japan will not fully reflect on its role in World War II this year. We've had recent visitors from China in Washington trying to talk to every possible expert they can who might be able to read Prime Minister Abe's mind and know what he is going to say this year about Japan's role in the war. Recently, Prime Minister Li Keqiang told the Financial Times that the 70th anniversary is both a test and an opportunity for Sino-Japanese relations. And indeed, Xi Jinping is also, when he met with Prime Minister Abe in Jakarta, noted that Japan does need to face up to its role in history. So we will see what happens. I think China is to some extent in this wait-and-see mode, not wanting to go too far forward, but giving Japan some incentive by having Xi Jinping meet with Prime Minister Abe in Jakarta. The last issue that I'd like to address very briefly is the role of the United States, as we were asked that question, whether the U.S. should mediate the relationship between China and Japan. I'm of the view that the United States cannot be a neutral party. We can remain neutral on the territorial dispute itself, but we have a security treaty with Japan, and therefore I don't think that we should be mediating the differences. However, the U.S. can and should and is encouraging China and Japan to exercise self-restraint, to find common ground for cooperation, and to implement crisis management mechanisms. So all of this is being done. And I will close with one policy recommendation, and that is that I think that the US, China, and Japan should try to revisit what they really made some very good progress on very early on in the Obama administration in 2009, when all three agreed to establish a trilateral mechanism, an official dialogue mechanism. It was scheduled for June. It was ultimately Beijing that decided to not go ahead because of objections from North Korea. It would be interesting to raise the questions as to whether we would be where we are today if that mechanism had been established, whether that could have helped to reconcile some of the problems and prevent things to go as negatively as they have. But that's something that I think that all three nations should think about going forward with in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to talk about why the relationship, even perhaps temporarily, is getting better right now. And also, the second point I'm going to talk about is how it is going to develop from now on. And my answer to the question of this session, could it be worse? My answer is yes, but probably not likely for the time being. And I'm going to explain through my presentation. The first, why did it get better? From Japan's point of view, in short, Abe thinks he has better things to do than confronting China. And really, in a short term way of explaining it, that he needed, in order to have the meeting with Xi Jinping on the sideline of APEC, the reason why he needed it is because he had a nationwide election coming up toward the end of the year, and this China diplomatic issue was the biggest vulnerability, political vulnerability he had. That means that the opposition party could really criticize Abe of not being able to improve the relationship with China. You know, on the economic front, as you know, Abenomics was performing fairly well, but this, the diplomatic problem with China is the biggest vulnerability he had, and he wanted to eliminate this vulnerability before the election. That was a really short-sighted explanation of why he wanted to have the improvement. But in a little bit in a longer term, as I said, he's not in the second term of the prime minister, and probably he's not going to have any more chance to be the prime minister. And now he is thinking of the legacy of his legacy as a prime minister, how he wants to be remembered in the history, how he wants to go down the history. And he's been saying many times since he inaugurated as a prime minister this time around that he wants to be remembered as the first Japanese prime minister after the World War II to amend the constitution. And that's his ultimate goal as a prime minister. And if you look at all those things he's been doing, I think it's fairly accurate to see that that's really that he wants to do. And in order for that to happen, he has to maintain certain approval ratings, and he has to accumulate certain level of political capitals to invest in this endeavor. And it costs a lot of political capital. And if he keeps on confronting with China, he will use up this political capital that he may have to use later for the amendment of the constitution. And also, Japan-China relationship has been described as a strategic liability by the region. And that's, first of all, embarrassment to Abe, but more practically, it's not good for him to really enhance the alliance with the United States, because that makes the United States really nervous. And as we know, we just concluded, Japan and United States concluded the guideline review, but he had this guideline review coming up this year, so he had to do something about China so that United States come out and say, hey, Shinzo, you had to do a little bit more about China side. we can't do guideline just to confront China. And so he had to do something about China. So in order to enhance the alliance, he had to improve the relationship with China. It's kind of contradictory, but that's true. So and of course, the final element is economy. In order for him to be successful and sustain his administration, he has to have Abenomics going on. And in order for that, he has to improve the economic relationship with China. So all those reasons, he really had to, he needed to improve the relationship with China. And if you look at the 4-point agreement that both Japan and China entered into prior to this APEC summit meeting, it's really remarkable, because if you put a headline to explain how remarkable it was, it's ambiguity. It's really ambiguous about both territorial issue and history issue, but both Japan and China agreed on these ambiguity. It's because they had other intentions, other things to accomplish. That's why they could swallow those ambiguities. But I think it really shows the evolution of the relationship, and I think it really shows the strength of Japan-China bilateral relations right now, emerging strengths. So those are the reasons why the relationship improved for the moment from Japan's point of view. But I think, as I said, 4-point agreement has to be agreed upon by both sides, Japan and China. And so China also has a reason why they had to improve the relationship. I don't go into too much detail because I'm not a China expert, and Bonnie is sitting right next to me and looking at me, so I'm not going to do it. But I think the reason is Xi Jinping administration needs more boost to maintain and enhance its legitimacy. And cracking down on the corruption is not enough. And because the economy is slowing down and going into new normalcy, even if all those newspapers, including Global Times, saying new normalcy is good for Chinese, but the people, I don't think buy it. Less money is bad news. So I think they need Xi Jinping administration needed to really improve the economy, and for that, I think they needed to improve the relationship with Japan. And from U.S. point of view, as I said, United States did not want to really, drawn into any type of confrontation with China because of Japan. So I think what United States did in order to prevent it is, of course, one, to tell Abe to do something about China, but at the same time, stand really strong behind Japan and try to make China realize their strategy to isolate Japan doesn't work, and to make them realize that the only way out is to improve the relationship with Japan. I think it worked. There are a number of things that United States actually did. One is, you may remember, but last April, China disinvited Japan from the International Fleet Review. Mm-hmm. And the United States decided not to send the ships, And I interviewed Eva Medeiros, NSC Asia director at that moment, and it was my scoop, by the way, that the United States decided not to send a ship. And he said, I still remember very well, I asked him, why? Why did you decide not to send a ship to China? And he said that it's a matter of principle, and in order for the solidarity with the ally. A lot of people in Japan was about to be to cry. It's such a strong message to Japan. And China, as you know, ended up canceling the fleet review, totally. And that was one. And the next one was the famous Obama's statement that the Japan-US Security Treaty applies to Senkaku. It was just a few weeks after this, the fleet review thing. So, those are the very strong message for United States to send China. Don't even think about isolating Japan because we don't want it. And I think it worked. And the reason why 4-point agreement was possible, the United States government explanation is because of Obama's Article 5 statement, Senkaku. And Japanese government doesn't really think that simplistically, but the United States is saying to Japan, that was the reason why Japan and China could enter into 4-point agreement, and China agreed to enter into that agreement. So apparently, United States is taking the position to push China to improve the relationship with Japan, and also push Japan, Abe, to improve the relationship. And so, it worked. And I think that was the entire mechanism of what happened. And then, what is going to happen from now? Is this a temporary improvement sustainable? I think it is, but I think it's fragile, and I explain. First, on Japan side, there are conditions and risks in order for this temporary improvement to sustain. On Japan end, first of all, Abe should not screw up the 70th anniversary statement. As my colleague from China pointed out, and also perhaps all the audience here are aware of, if Abe comes up with something really anger China or Korea, I think whole this current status of the improvement with China will just be blown away instantly. And I think Abe knows it very well. So what I hear is, I may be totally wrong, so if I'm wrong, just forget about what I say, but I heard that Abe has been already reluctantly persuaded that he has to make this statement in a way that it doesn't really aggravate China or Korea to the point that the current status will be destroyed. So I don't know which words he's going to use, apology or admission of aggression. I don't know, but overall, that's the story I hear. And but of course, I'm a reporter, so I may be totally wrong. And okay.
Right.
And second, China. And of course, Abe's side, Abenomics has to be successful also. Without healthy economy, this kind of diplomatic course cannot be maintained. On the China side, China also has to maintain the course. But as we see, and Bonnie pointed out, beyond APEC, it seems to me China still wants to maintain this course of improving the relationship, just as we see that China accepting the second meeting with Abe at Jakarta, and China did not complain about the speech that Abe made in Jakarta, which did not have the word of apology, and ROK complained about it. So there is a distinct difference between China's approach and Korea's approach. I think Korea is now a little bit isolated and in that approach. And but anyway. So
I can say principled approach.
Okay. So but the risk is, whether this China's economy can stay strong, because what's going to happen if China's economy tanks? I think Xi Jinping has to play the card of anti-Japan card, because anti-Japan is the ultimate source of legitimacy for Communist Party rule. And Japan, I think China has been exploiting Japan's guilty conscience to boost the legitimacy for the party. But now, since the economy is doing good and Xi Jinping has a really good political standing and consolidation of power, perhaps he has a luxury not to play the Japan card. But if those luxuries are gone, I think he has to go back to the ultimate source for the legitimacy. And then probably Abe will react also. So it's going to be a really nasty exchange of negative comments. So in order to avoid that, the Chinese economy has to stay healthy. And finally, the United States. I think the United States also should maintain the course that they are doing right now. Stand strong behind Japan, but also sending a message to both China and Japan that may improve the relationship. And the risk is the lack of attention in White House in Asia, and the fluctuation of China policy that Obama administration demonstrated over the last few years. And so if some big distraction, diplomatic distraction happens in Middle East, for example, it may really deprive the Obama administration of the attention to really work on this kind of delicate management of Japan-China relationship. Then if something really drastic happens, then Obama administration may not be able to act on these issues in time and in a proper way. Then it could blow away and blow up, and whole things may go back to square one. And, but I don't think it's very likely. Thank you.
I think they're the first positive comments I've heard about the Obama administration's policies in Asia in
Okay.
quite a while. Please, Professor Kim.
Okay. Many people worry about the worsening relationship between China and Japan, but if you look at the some factors, I think the relationship can be much more stable than we maybe think now. The year 2010 was the turning point in China-Japan relationship. In terms of the GDP volume, China surfaced Japan in 2010, and the incident around the Diaoyu and in Japanese Senkaku Islands changed the nature of China-Japan maritime disputes, maybe from the agreed framework to uncertainties. Prime Minister Abe made his determination for Japan to play a balancing role against China in this region, and then strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance. For this purpose, he's taken a bold approaches to mobilize all possible means of Japan, even history issues and other, human right, all kinds of issues. Then China-Japan relationship has been deteriorated, and now many people in this region, and then as well as around the world, worry about relationships. But if we explain the current China relationship, we have to see the 5 factors which are quite important. First one is the structural one, power transition factors. Second one is the leadership factor, the characteristic of Xi Jinping and then Abe. Third one is the legitimacy factor in domestic politics. Fourth one, U.S.-China relations, of course, important. And fifth one is China's new diplomacy initiative. This is also important, we have to consider. If you look at the power transition, China may surface the volume of GDP of the U.S. Around 2020, and maybe military expenditure during the 2030s if the growth rate continues. But the shale gas revolution will positively affect both the national capacity of China as well as the United States. So we are facing both eagle and dragon flying to the high sky, getting entangled now. And then uncertainty and potential instability related to the power transition in this region continues then for a long time. And then so none will be able to force the other to do what the other doesn't want to do. Second factor is it means for the China and the Japan relationship, the power transition factors is negative, affected. Leadership factor, Xi Jinping and Abe Shinzo both are a man of confidence, so inherited by noble family backgrounds and their career paths. And so it means both shows the characteristic of stubbornness and determination, which made them difficult to compromise. Negative. Legitimacy and domestic politics. Xi Jinping launched a dramatic political campaign and purge against the existing powerful elite groups much earlier than we anticipate, in fact. He fully utilized foreign policies to garner domestic support outside the elite groups. Abe also will utilize China's threat theory, maybe, to promote his agenda of normalization of Japan and gain support from the domestic audience. But Xi Jinping seems to have a tight grip of power by 2014, so which may allow more space to moderate his policy against Japan, maybe this year from now on. Next factor is U.S.-China relations. Obama's China policy has been the double balancing of engagement and hedging, and Obama embraced China's proposed new type of major country relationship at the summit in June 2013 in principle. However, the United States has been reluctant to fully embrace the concept in practice, particularly the concept of mutual respect. So the United States and China reached, in spite of such differences, still reached the mutual understanding of principles of crisis management and no military crash and the mutual benefits. But also they entered the new era of competition on the institution building and arrangements in the future. Maybe it may be the fears. So if you look at the U.S.-China relationship, maybe the influence over China and Japan relations may be both and both, negative and positive, both aspects has. And then the next one, which is I think the most important, China's new normal diplomacy. China launched the new normal diplomacy, Xinjiang diplomacy. China changed their identity to great power. from the developing country. This is important. And also to a dual characteristic of continental and maritime power instead of continental power. So based upon this changing identity, China adopted the comprehensive grand strategy as a global power rather than a regional power. So China situated itself as a hub of the Eurasian continent on a mid to long-term basis. Now I think the Chinese current strategy can be summarized as follows. First one is manage the East, means under the strong pressure from the U.S.-Japan alliance, China doesn't want the confront straightforwardly. So change the direction. So second one is advance toward the west, means the Dongguan and Xijin. Third one is open the gateway to the south. So China's Silk Road will go toward the south, southern the Pacific Oceans. Fourth one is harmonize with the north, means that China will have try to have a good relationship with Russia as well as the Mongol. And then under the strong pressure of the U.S.-Japan alliance and the U.S. influence over the region, and the borders of North Korea, China seeks to avoid direct confrontation against the United States and Japan, and takes policy priority on the west, but to manage the east. So this is, I think, the general, orientation of Chinese current, foreign policies. So if I summarize all these factors together, put together, and then I can say the China and Japan can't avoid competition and confrontation for the time being. But still, in a moderate sense, they will maintain the kind of relationship than before. Cooperation will be limited. However, both governments seek to avoid crashes. Negotiation for crisis management will start working. So I think it's a good sign. China, Japan and the United States had a security guideline, and the United States support Japan firmly. Then United States also is trying to avoid a kind of entanglement, entrapment from the Japan-China competition. And so as my friend Kato Yuichi mentioned, then the United States will place the more pressure on Japan and then to have a better relationship and then also the crisis management. So, and so on to the China. So if we see all these factors, then China will have tried to manage the relationship in the east, but go to the west. So this is the Chinese policy orientation now. So it's a relatively, for the time being, good sign for China-Japan relationship. Thank you.
I thought I'd now ask each of our panelists a question which may or may not have to do with what they have said, and I'll go ahead with that and then invite each panelist to answer the question briefly or at length, and then to comment on what else has been said. So to you, Mr. Chen, I want to ask, it's been quite optimistic, more optimistic than I thought it might be, on the immediate outlook of China-Japan relations for a lot of reasons. But looking much forward, say 5 to 10 years, even further forward, do you think it's almost inevitable that there will be a serious clash between China and Japan, particularly given that the United States is relying more on Japan to maintain the balance of power?
Okay, thank you. This has something to do with China's definition of its own standards in the world. Whether China is a fragile power, as Susan Shirk describes, or it's a partial power, as David Shambles said, China is a regional power now, after 30 years of development in economic terms, in political terms, in military terms. So the root cause of the current Sino-Japanese confrontation is what I would term as the shift of power in East Asia. For the first time in history, both Japan and China are big powers at the same moment. previously the turn of the relationship was linked to the rights of one and the fault of the other. But now, both are economic powerhouse with extensive international ties and military strength of great powers. So I would say that we are trying to define China as to give its deserved status in the world. So there's some justification that someone would think one's rise would lead to the fall of the other. Actually, that's not the case. There's an old Chinese proverb which says, no two rival tigers can exist in the same mountain. 一山不容二虎. But in modern times, in the age of internet, in the age of information, war itself should not be the solution to any disputes, especially when China is concerned. So I think, back to your question, in 5 or 10 years' time, there might be renewed confrontation between China and Japan, but war would not be a solution or choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's optimistic. Bonnie, I wanted to ask you, the Obama administration keeps saying that its alliances in Asia are not against China. And we heard this again yesterday. I guess it was in the press conference. Obama said that the new defense guidelines with Japan were not aimed against China. It's sort of an unbelievable way to describe it. I mean, no one really believes this. What's a better way for the United States to posit its alliances, and in particular these new defense guidelines?
Well, there's been quite a bit of discussion here over the last 2 days and at many conferences. In fact, you mentioned Evan Medeiros, our senior director at the National Security Council, spoke at length at the NBR, the National Bureau of Asian Research, earlier this year on the issue of alliances. And I think it's quite clear that U.S. alliances have evolved in a way that has advanced the interests of the United States and those countries. They are no longer serving the purpose that they did in the past against the Soviet Union. I think it would not be correct to say that the U.S.-Japan alliance is aimed at China. The alliance is, one of its major functions is to reassure Japan and to provide defense to Japan. The United States has long been a situation where it would come to Japan's defense, but the Japanese would not necessarily come to the defense of the United States. And this is the issue with the adoption now of collective self-defense, assuming that the legislation goes through in Japan. But there has been a lot of, as I said, insecurity in Japan as a result of China's rise. And for those of you who are interested in understanding some of the impact of China's rise on Japanese and Japan's domestic politics, I would recommend my good friend Sheila Smith's recent book, Intimate Rivals. She's at the Council of Foreign Relations. And it goes into several case studies of why the Japanese have had so much anxiety. So Japanese insecurity, if not responded to by the United States with greater reassurance, I think would have very negative consequences for the region. And I think that the new defense guidelines are in part about that. They do two very important things. They broaden the scope of functional cooperation between the U.S. and Japan. So this includes intelligence, humanitarian relief, missile defense, space, and cyber. These are areas where we are expanding and committing that we will work more closely together, our two militaries. And then second, to deepen security cooperation by further integrating the self-defense forces and U.S. military operations. And so this is what is described in the guidelines as seamless and robust responses, particularly to events in the Asia Pacific. But as you say, the guidelines, and this is explicitly said in the guidelines themselves, they are not bound by geography. So there is no definition of how the alliance or where the alliance is going to cooperate. And it is also said that they are not aimed at any specific country. But it is fair to say, Jane, that since Japan's concerns are primarily, as I said earlier, about China's rise, China's growing military pressure on China, and particularly around the disputed islands in the East China Sea, combined with the growing threat from North Korea, have clearly been the drivers behind Japan's desire to bolster this alliance with the United States. Every one of our alliances has different dynamics. Very few people would say that our alliance with Korea is against China, and the Koreans would not want it to be, nor would the United States. So there's no larger phenomenon of the alliances being against China. And in the case of Japan, this is where the concerns, I think, about China are greatest in the region. And I think that going forward, if the Sino-Japanese relationship does improve, then perhaps there will be reduced concerns about the alliance actually being against China. I think there is much about the U.S.-Japan alliance that benefits China. There are very few Chinese who would say that, but certainly the fact that we have a nuclear umbrella over Japan, what people used to refer to as the cork in the bottle. I mean, Japan is probably no time in the near future going to consider the acquisition of a nuclear deterrent. And I think that that's something that continues to benefit China.
Yochi, I was very interested. Professor Kim brought up the similar backgrounds of President Xi and Shinzo Abe, both from sort of blue blood pedigree families, both quite strong nationalists. Would the China-Japanese relationship at the moment be fundamentally different if there was a different Japanese prime minister?
Well,
one who is not quite so nationalistic.
I'll answer this way. As long as Abe is in power, how long is a really good question for a political reporter like me. I can keep on going talking about a couple of hours if you want, but maybe in the bar later. But but the one thing for sure is, if Abe disappears, I think the alliance management will be tougher. And the reason is because Abe's, even whether a Liberal Democratic Party maintains the power or the power goes to opposition, there's a consensus view that the next Prime Minister of Japan will be not so steadfast and try to be close with the United States, but probably put a little bit distance. And the other characteristics will be a little bit less nationalistic, because even though Abe is fairly successful, but at the same time, there's a bit of an element of Abe fatigue among the Japanese public, And as long as the economy is maintained good, but if that national pride agenda or the enhancing the alliance agenda, those approaches could backfire. And within the LDP, what's being talked about is here again, I may be totally wrong, but Abe may not last beyond 2017. And this September, Abe is going to face the re-election of the party presidency of LDP. And if he wins, and everybody thinks that he will have 3 more years as a term. But not many people in Tokyo, and especially in the political circle, think that he can really go all the way to the end of this 3-year term because economy. And as you know, Abenomics has been successful, but it lacks the real fundamental reform part, the third arrow. It's still really shabby. And perhaps the only hope he has is one, TPP. TPP will force Abe to reform the really difficult, the agenda like agriculture. But he can say, oh, because the TPP, I had to do it, And the other one is Tokyo Olympics 2020. But those are the perhaps hopes that he can have for making this third arrow challenge go away, and they keep on going. But probably it's not that easy. And then what's going to happen is that he has to raise the tax, consumption tax, in 2017. And the prediction is right now the stock price is really high right now, 20,000 yen or so. But it will go down from now on, slowly. And then by the end of 2016. Maybe the Japanese economy will be weaker, and that's exactly the time Abe has to make a decision or announcement that he's going to raise a tax. What do you think is going to happen to approval rating? Right? So even his rivals in LDP are now preparing for the challenging him when he goes down in 2017. So. He's not invincible, and so the current set of policies, diplomatic package, could be changed in a substantial way. And in terms of, I think, Japan-China relationship, it could break both ways. Because Abe at least thinks for the moment that he has to improve the relationship with China for his domestic political purpose and calculation, as I said. And if he goes down, if he knows that he's going to go down, he's going to probably get rid of this pragmatism and steer drastically toward the agenda that he has to accomplish as a prime minister by the end of his life as a prime minister. As I said, he wants to amend the constitution. So he may shift drastically, even if he may not have enough political capital. I don't know, he may just venture into that kind of ultimate goal he has. Then that Japan-China relationship may go sour. And also if the next prime minister comes in, after that kind of scenario plays out, it may be hard for the next prime minister to really improve the relationship with China. So does this answer your question?
It sure does.
Okay.
Domestic politics reign. Professor Kim, I'm just very curious. How does South Korea look at all of this? Is there much concern here about we've heard a fairly optimistic account here of the near future for China-Japan relations, but is there a basic fear here of a clash further down the road?
It is not necessary to be optimistic for the South Korean perspective, because it means China's priority will be lower in this region. I mean, they are paying attention to going to the West, and their investments and their economic activities, all this kind of will go to the West. It means it's bad news for South Korea, and also there is the psychological perceptional distance wider between the China and Japan, is also the negative for the South Koreans, the interest. For the South Koreans' perspective, better cooperation between or among major countries in this region, including maybe the United States, will be most beneficial for. So that's why we are trying to, to let the United States, China, and communicate more, and then also Japan. We also have to improve our relationship with Japan. Otherwise, we are gonna, as Kato Yuichi mentioned, we are gonna be isolated. So that's why we are. I recommend the Korean governments and the people, and then we have to improve our relationship with North Korea as well as Japan, and then also we welcome the U.S., China, and the strategic communication, the better cooperation. This is our position.
Do any of the panelists have anything they want to say now, or should I open it to the floor? Mr. Chen, please.
I have a quick comment
Please.
on Mr. Kato's word on ambiguity. If I understand you correct, you mean that the two governments tried to remain ambiguous on historical issues and the territorial issues. But in the 1972 joint communique, that actual 8 of the Potsdam Proclamation is mentioned. That article says the terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out, and the Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. So for this, in this joint communique, there's one line saying Japan firmly maintains its stance and articulate of the Potsdam Proclamation. So at least in this document, I think the attitude is toward this territorial issues is very clear. Thank you.
Can I respond? Well, before the 4-point agreement, and before the first meeting between Abe and Xi, China has been telling Japan that there are 2 conditions that has to be met in order for the meeting to happen. One, Abe should say clearly that he's not going to visit Yasukuni Shrine again. 2, Japanese government should admit that there is a territorial dispute over Senkaku. Those are the 2 conditions that China said to Japan through various channels. But if you read the 4-point agreement, neither of the point has been addressed as China demanded. So I admire China actually. So it was an enormous step forward that China made. And as for the Yasukuni Shrine, it doesn't even say Yasukuni. There's no word in Yasukuni. And the territorial dispute, it's kind of vague. China is saying that now Japan admitted by the 3rd article of agreement, but Japan said no, there's no change, but there's no dispute beyond that. So both agreed to keep those issues ambiguous and move on. So it was a remarkable agreement, I think.
The agreement didn't even mention the word islands, I think. It just mentioned waters.
It says Senkaku, but it's kind of vague, as I said. So I think it's a remarkable victory for both countries.
Please.
Yeah. I'd like to have a question to the Kato. The democratic Prime Minister coming from the Democratic Party of Japan, and tried to have a better relationship with South Korea, and then also the allied with the United States. But Abe came to power, and then some people in Korea believe Japan strategically, intentionally pushed South Korea to the kind of maybe the image of orbit onto the China and or future ally of China, that kind of image. If we understand the sensitivity and vulnerability of Korea and Japan, South Korean situation is, and then also the position must be different from that of Japan. But I do not think this kind of argument doesn't really buy the reality. So And for the short term and for the tactical reason, I think it's quite effective and useful. But for the longer, perspective, for the South Korean and the China relations and the Japan relations, and then also the regional cooperation, it is negative. So how would you think about it?
I think I'm getting all kinds of signs about time running out, but I see that Doug Powell had his hand wavering around. No? Is anybody? Yes, please. Please go ahead. Microphone?
I just have a question for Body. That is now the new defense guideline. So the characteristics is global, and but I think and seamless. But I think there's still a gap between U.S. and Japan. U.S. really hope Japan can help itself on a lot of issues globally. But Japan really hope U.S. to help them just in the East China Sea and maybe Diaoyu Island. So some Japanese even told me U.S.'s promise is lip service because they know there will be no military conflict in the East China Sea. But Japan should do a lot of things to help U.S. globally. So do you agree this or not? But another is just a brief comments that to Kato. That is, you said if China's economy can increase continue to decrease, China could play the anti-Japanese card again. But I don't think so. What China can get from playing the anti-Japanese card? I think the key elements for China's economy development is three things. The first is anti-corruption. The second is to deepen the economic reform. The third is to develop a good international relationship and the neighbor relationship. So that will be helpful for China's economy.
There's a big sign up saying please end, so can you please very quickly?
On the issue of whether or not there could be a conflict in the East China Sea, I'm sure you know that American officials have in fact been quite concerned. I think particularly immediately after 2012 and the year following the uptick in Chinese patrols, which were not predictable. The ROEs were unclear. November 2013, we had the establishment of the Air Defense Identification Zone, certainly led to increased concern in Washington about the potential for conflict. Now, I don't think anybody thinks that either side is looking for an accident, but it could occur. So I'm surprised that anybody would say to you that the United States is dismissive of the potential of a conflict, a skirmish or accident that it could get drawn into. And the second point is this notion that the Japanese don't really care very much about the global aspect of the alliance. That also surprises me. I think that Japanese, as Americans, are quite proud of the fact that this alliance is not just regional. It is global. We work together on an enormous number of issues, as do the US and Koreans. Even though Korea's main concern is North Korea, and certainly Japan's main security concern are more immediate geographically. But the cooperation that the US and Japan are engaged in globally is a very important aspect of the alliance. So I guess maybe it depends who you're talking to, but I think that US and Japan believe that these defense guidelines and you can look at the fact sheets of what was released today in the security cooperation between the US and Japan are very significant. They lay out a vision statement of the alliance that are very important, I think, to both peoples. And I think that they will stand the test of time. Remember, the last defense guidelines were created in '97. And so I think you're going to see these in place for a long time, and you're going to see the U.S.-Japan relationship flourish in a lot of areas.
Well, I want to really thank our panelists. You were just terrific. I have one last question because I'm very interested, and also because this has got to be the only panel where we haven't yet mentioned the AIIB. So, Yoichi.
I didn't mention it.
Oh, sorry. Yes, but you didn't dwell on it. So, Yoichi, for you, is Japan going to join the AIIB, and if so, how quickly? And will it do so with the encouragement of the United States?
Well, I think I really don't know, to begin with, and I'm not an economic reporter, so my speculation is as good as yours. But I think.
But this is not only economic.
Unless there's going to be an agreement with the United States, I don't think Japan is going to join. Because this is not an economic issue. This is a geostrategic issue.
Absolutely.
You know, this is a counter. I think AIIB is just a tool of Ida Ilu, One Belt, One Road strategy, and I think it is regarded as a counter strategy to U.S. rebalance. So it's not easy. So it's not. I don't think Japan will make a decision very lightly in the light of just concluding the guidelines right now.
So you don't see it this year?
Maybe not. I don't know.
Next year.
You need to get the scoop. He's not.
That's true.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.